Alejandro Marcel is a 71-year-old transgender activist who has spent the last 6 decades fighting for social justice, beginning in the early days of gay liberation in San Francisco. Over the years, he's worked with HIV/AIDS patients, with homeless LGBTQ+ youth, with sex workers on the street, and most recently with trans elders, as they face the challenges of navigating an American healthcare system that, he says, doesn't really understand them and their needs. Born in California in 1954 and assigned female at birth, Alejandro says he knew from the age of 3 that his physical body did not align with his gender identity. He went on to become one of the first people in the United States to undergo gender-affirming surgery. In this candid and at times graphic interview with PFLAG Cape Cod's Rick Koonce, Alejandro talks about the remarkable arc of his life and career as a social justice champion. He talks, too, about the challenges facing members of the transgender community today in light of the current U.S. administration's efforts to systematically discriminate against them. Despite all that, Alejandro remains cautiously hopeful for those who identify as transgender, but he says they need to claim their right to exist and do so vociferously. In that spirit, he encourages trans people, especially trans youth, to embrace their authenticity, to learn from their transgender elders and the social movement builders of the past, and above all, to live their lives unapologetically in pursuit of everyday joy. Alejandro Marcel, welcome to Profiles in LGBTQ+ Courage. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Namaste, my dear friend Rick.
Your background, you are a longtime transgender activist. You've worked in the social justice arena now for many decades. Going back, I think you got your start in the early days of gay liberation in San Francisco, and you've worked with a variety of populations across the LGBTQ+ spectrum. So I think for our listeners, it would be interesting for them to first know something about the arc and sweep of your career as an activist.
Thank you. Coming from San Francisco, I was in the gay liberation movement at a time before they had the term transgender, but I worked very closely with the gay population living on Castro Street. I worked very closely and knew Harvey Milk and the whole progress of the gay movement at that time, prior to AIDS hitting the community. And I learned a great deal about movement building and the patience and the strategy and about movement building. And then I carried that on to working with farm workers, civil rights movements, the same strategies that you use to build a community for people and freedom. From there, I went to the University of California, Berkeley, and I studied literature, and I also studied political philosophy and creating movement building. I took courses from Angela Davis, from Alice Walker, from June Jordan.
Toni Morrison too, right?
And Toni Morrison, and many other African writers that had a lot to do with South Africa at that time. So I was able to learn at the feet of some of the greatest movement builders in the history of this country. From there, I moved on to developing a movement with the trans community before the word transgender even came about.
And let's get into all of that, but first, maybe a little bit of your backstory. You grew up in Northern California, birth year 1954, you're 71 today, and I understand that you knew at the age of 3 that you had been born into the incorrect body. Is that physically, is that the correct way to describe it?
Yes, at the age of 3. Yes,
You had been assigned female at birth.
I was assigned female at birth visually, but that wasn't the whole story. And there are medical reasons to explain that. At 3, I knew there was something missing. When I looked in the mirror or when I felt myself, I was missing a penis, to be blunt. And I wasn't sure what that meant. at the time. So as a child, I just lived with that and continued to behave and played with boys and acclimated to the world of growing up of being male.
Was this what we would describe today as a sense of dysphoria, physical dysphoria? Is that what you were experiencing at 3?
Yeah.
Yes. And, I think for people who don't really understand the transgender phenomenon, can you talk a little bit more about what dysphoria feels like and what it is?
Well, dysphoria for me, I was born with an entire cast on my body, looked in the mirror, saw the cast, but knew something inside me, that there was something else inside me that wasn't coming through, wasn't coming forward, that this cast didn't represent who I was, and that I needed to break out from that cast. It was clear at the age of 3. I had no hesitation. I had no questions. It was the reality that I experienced prior to having any kind of cultural understanding of masculinity or femininity. It was beyond those cultural concepts of gender. It was biological.
We talked a little bit before the taping today about the biological and physiological basis of sexuality and gender identity, and you offered some interesting thoughts about the biochemical components of this. Could you share that with our listeners?
Biologically, for someone like myself, what happens is that, and I've understood this through studies and studies through Europe and through the United States, and it's also available on the internet. How is the brain sex? Just Google that, and you'll get the Mayo Clinic and the Cleveland Clinic, and they all begin to talk about this. What they have understood is that our brain is sexed at a different point in utero, which is the second trimester. Now, the brain is sexed according to what hormone washes the mother is putting out at the time that the brain is sensitive to understanding its sex, to receiving the message of what sex it is. And so in my case, my mother had, and she confirmed, extreme amount of anxiety and fear that happened in her pregnancy that instigated large hormones of cortisol and androgen. That androgen wash clocked my brain to perceive itself as male, but did not occur for the external part of my genitalia. So in essence, I had a bifurcated experience as a child in utero. And that is why my brain automatically knew in itself why something was missing, because it perceived that I should have had something. Now, I ask your audience to close their eyes and without pointing to their genitalia, how do they know they're male or female? Not masculine or feminine, male or female. It's between the ears.
I think this is a perspective on gender identity that we don't hear talked about very much. Now, you came out, as I understand it, to your mother at age 4 to share with her what you were feeling. Tell us about that experience. What was that like for you? It was not a good experience from what I understand.
No, it wasn't a good experience. My parents were culturally from another country, and at that time,
You're Hispanic, yeah?
I'm Hispanic, and at that time, medicine knew very little about this. And I think for a lot of us, people of color especially, our parents don't want us to suffer any more than we have to. And I think gay and lesbian blacks, African Americans, also experience this. Their perception is you're going to experience a lot of hardship because you're a person of color, because you're marginalized. And now on top of this, you have the audacity to say you're gay. That's just going to bring more pain. And I understand that perspective from them, the fear that they had. No, it wasn't a good experience. But I knew that at that moment, I needed to just keep it within myself. And because I did that, I did not feel that I had to erase that truth because it was my truth. It was just the way I saw myself in the world.
So after you shared this information, what happened then? How did your parents respond to you, and what were your early growing up years like?
I was very fortunate because I was very androgynous, and that's how I negotiated myself, was through androgyny. And I would go to the Salvation Army and buy men's clothing and sweaters. And for some reason, my parents didn't interfere with that. And I had many, many friends. And I made sure that it wasn't just about being transgender, that I was a three-dimensional person. I loved tennis. I loved to dance. I loved parties. That I wasn't going to deny myself those growing up years. In fact, for my prom, my girlfriend and I, instead of go to the prom, we went to San Francisco's one of the most prestigious hotels for the prom instead, and I took her to see Marlene Dietrich. And we had dinner, and we saw Marlene Dietrich, which was incredible, which I thought was much better than going to the prom with a bunch of guys who had pimples.
In a high school gym.
In a high school gym. So we had a beautiful dinner at the San Francisco Top of the Hill Hotel, the Fairmont Hotel.
I know it well.
And we saw Marlene Dietrich. So I didn't miss out on a thing because I just compensated and compensated. I was not going to let myself be denied a childhood or a teenage life.
And it strikes me, Alejandro, that this is an early example of you bringing resilience to your life circumstances, which you've talked about and we want to talk about more. And well, now you were one of the first people in the U.S. to transition medically. And I think you told me that you began testosterone at age 19 and you had surgery at age 22.
Correct. Actually, the first person to transition in the 50s that we know of was Christine Jorgensen. So she was the pioneer, but of my generation, I was one of the first.
You know, it's interesting. You talk about being multidimensional. We should tell our listeners you have a PhD in classics, is it? Classical literature?
In comparative literature.
Comparative literature, and you've studied at multiple universities. What were you studied at Oxford and also at in California?
I got my degrees at the University of California, Berkeley, which I'm very proud of because we were the free speech movement university, anti-war university. On top of that, I went to Oxford University for a master's, and I loved education. I was very fortunate to have exposure, to have access, because I came from a migrant family in California who were farm workers. We lived in people's garages. We had severe poverty. And my father, whose first language is Spanish, went ahead and got his undergraduate degree to prove to us that we had no excuse as his children. And I took that and I ran with that.
When I look at the arc of your career and I hear you describe what you've done, really interesting to hear a little bit more about your work with the Justice Resource Institute as a case manager for homeless and LGBTQ plus youth. So let's talk about that. And then also your experience in founding the Transgender Education Network in the 90s. So maybe why don't we start with the first of those, your experience as a caseworker. How did you get into that and how did it inform you and shape you?
Oh, that was a great experience. I didn't want to be a professor, so I decided I would go into some form of employment that practiced my activism and also allowed me to make changes. And I got a job as a resident case manager for a building on Huntington Ave in Boston for HIV/AIDS patients and their studios. And I was there for about 6 months, and they promoted me to being a case manager. I had a caseload of 80 clients. And as I said to you earlier, that was before AZT. So a lot of my clients were dying left and right. It was up to me to sit with them in their process of dying because they were rejected by their parents, because they were gay or they were drug IV users. So many of them died in one of the poorest hospitals in Boston, which is in Jamaica Plains, called the Shattuck Hospital. And then I had to go to their apartments and clean up the rooms and notify their family. It taught me a great deal about compassion and humanity. And then I heard in the mid-90s that the Department of Public Health was looking for JRI to open up a transgender health program to work with transgenders in terms of healthcare and HIV outreach. So I was funded by the Department of Public Health to develop a program and enjoyed that immensely. And one thing led to another, and then I wound up in the federal government. But in the process, I also worked with trans homeless youth, as well as gay and lesbian homeless youth on the streets. I opened up a youth center called the Urban Institute so that they would come in and they could take showers and have something to eat before they went out and exchanged sex for a place to sleep at night. So I tried to give them 2 hours of just being a kid and play on the computers. And I learned a great deal about sex work in this country and the lack of understanding and compassion that we have, and how many, many youth are caught in that realm right now.
As you describe those experiences, Alejandro, it strikes me this was mission work. This is like someone being overseas in a less developed country, working with the indigent population. And how did this change you?
It deconstructed my ego. It wasn't about me. The universe wasn't about me anymore. The universe gave me a sense that my mission was to serve and to love wherever I'm at. And once I got out of my way of my own ambitions, my life became easier, and it taught me how to survive the suffering of others and to be with them and just hold their hands in the process of doing that. But my life is about serving and love. That's it.
You know, I know much of your work over the years has blended social justice work, social advocacy with counseling of people about how to navigate America's healthcare system. And now you live in a nursing home here in Massachusetts, and you are on a mission there, and I want to get into that in a little bit. But meanwhile, can you talk a little bit from your perspective about the challenges that LGBTQ plus people in general and transgender people specifically face in navigating our healthcare system today?
That's a very good question, because it's a very complicated question. When I go to a hospital for a visit, the first thing I tell my doctors and my attendants is that I'm not in your medical book, okay? You're not going to find me in your medical book, in your medical reference. You're not going to find me. You have to work with me. And the reason is that medicine is culturally biased in this country. And I think women listeners would understand that. For many years, women were considered having hysteria. The term hysteria comes from Freud and the hysterectomy. Well, the LGBTQ and plus also experience that. We are not in their textbooks, and we have to confront them immediately.
You and I have spoken about the fact that institutionally the healthcare system pathologizes and dehumanizes people in many cases. And if you're open to sharing it, you shared with me a very intimate experience of being marginalized yourself. And it's a very personal and intimate story, but I'm wondering if you're willing to share that.
Well, I was sent about 3 months ago to a hospital, an ER emergency room, and I was put in a gurney. And ERs don't have as much room, so I was on a gurney in a hallway. And I told the nurse, I need to urinate. And the nurse said, that's fine, you have to urinate in this container, which is a container where men can urinate in the container without getting out of bed, which is a good thing because I had trouble walking. And many men in the nursing home urinate in these containers. They're plastic containers, and they're long and narrow. And my penis isn't that long. And excuse me if I'm being graphic, but this is really drives the point home. I told her I can't use it, and she started screaming at me in the hallway, and doctors were coming out like, why is this nurse screaming, and what is this patient not doing that the nurse is requesting? And finally, I was so fed up with the whole system that I knew that if I yelled at the top of my lungs what the reality of my life is, that she would learn. So I screamed out at the top of my lungs, I am sorry, but my penis is not big enough to put in your jar, so you have to walk me to the bathroom. And when I did that, immediately, doctors came flying out of the rooms, patients came out of the rooms, into the hallways, and did they look at me? No. They looked at her and said, what did you do to him? And I looked at her and I said, I told you I couldn't do it. And she immediately said, I am so sorry. And I said, all you had to do, and this isn't, you don't have to have a medicine. You don't have to go to, 8 years of medical school to understand. I told her, all you have to do is come up to me and quietly say to me, Mr. Marcel, what is the problem that you can't use this urinal? What can I do? That's all you had to do was whisper to me. And she said, I understand.
A teachable moment for her, but a grueling one.
And she took me to the bathroom, and she became my best friend. She said, I'm so sorry. I want you to teach me everything you know. You see, if we don't stand up for ourselves, if we don't believe we have a right to things, neither will anybody else. All right? I treat healthcare like it's business. My philosophy is, and people give me showers where I live. If you can't deal with me, that's your problem. Get me somebody else who can. Otherwise, I'll do it on my own. And then if I fall, it's your liability, not mine. It's simple as that. It's business.
Thank you for sharing a very painful personal story, but one so illustrative of the need for common decency and humanity in our healthcare system and more broadly in our society as a whole.
But also the need for us to get our self-righteousness back, what I call righteous anger back. Because if I didn't do that, it would have been worse for me. But I didn't deny myself visibility. I made them have to look at me, not for me to have to look at them. You understand? I want every trans person to hear me. You have to make them look at you.
What do you make of the U.S. administration's efforts to expunge gay people today and to basically remove them from the American narrative?
We're low-hanging fruit. That's what's happening. We're low-hanging fruit. They can go after us because most people are not educated. But what I tell trans youth is that the word transgender is out there. We are out there. They can't erase us. This will pass. I've been through this before. We are low-hanging fruit. We are political mileage for them. That's what this is. I don't even think they hate us. We are votes.
It's opportunistic othering. And
absolutely. I don't even think they're smart enough. I think they just think we can get enough people to vote for us because we're against them. That's all it is. But we have to hang on. This is going to pass. He's imploding, and it's happening fast.
You've spent 5 decades in the social activist space. And what's your advice nowadays to young transgender activists in terms of how to proceed going forward to continue this good fight that you have been fighting for many decades now?
It is very hard times. The difference between trans youth and myself is that they're losing rights that I helped them gain. I started out with no rights. That's not to say that I'm better. It's to say you're losing something you were born into. I don't know what it's like to lose my rights. I just know what it's like not to have rights. So it's a burden, and it's hard, and it's discouraging. Hang on to your authenticity. Own who you are. Don't spend so much time on TikTok. Start reading about your trans ancestors. Start reading about Martin Luther King. Start reading about, so many people that have come before us on different issues. Gather your strength. Wisdom doesn't have to come from identity. I don't have to be non-binary to have wisdom. If you don't identify with me, that's fine. But if I say something that you gather strength from, that's what counts, not my identity. Identity politics was useful, but now we have to gather strength from all of us together.
I'm curious, what is your advice and counsel to a young transgender person or someone today who thinks they might be transgender or just of an alternative sexuality? What's your advice to them?
Play.
Enjoy life.
Play. You are whatever you want to be. You are the miracle. You are the joy of the universe. You have room to skate one side to the other. You don't have to be posited in one situation. If you're male today, or you feel female, or you feel feminine, or whatever it is, if you're outside of the linear concepts of anything, everything is circular, friends. It's circular. Play, enjoy your life. That's why I survived. Because in spite of everything, I was going to have a girlfriend, and I did. I didn't go to the prom, but I went to see Marlene Dietrich. I went to go see Count Basie, for some of you who don't know. I went to see, Ella Fitzgerald, for you who don't know. I played. Don't waste your time worrying about what the other people perceive of you. You are who you are. And you know what? Every day you're going to be something different. So embrace it.
You're talking about people belonging to themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so important to do. And so, changing the conversation a little bit, so what's your advice to the parents of a child who they think might be transgender? How can they show up in a loving way? What's your advice to them? And do you have occasion to talk to parents who are struggling with this issue?
I do. I empathize with the difficulty of it because you fear what can happen to your child. But I think if you give your child guidance and counsel with the most accepting and loving way, and acceptance is the big issue here, and not to underestimate love, telling them that you love them. And they'll probably say, well, Mom, I know you love me, but they don't love me in school. We'll say, one day you're going to need my love again. And I want you to know I'm here. I know you're scared, but you give them good philosophy to live by. Read. Get them off their phones for a little bit.
You embody, I think, Alejandro, what I think of as a warrior spirit with this. I want to come back to this idea of resilience because I know it's an important theme for you. And when you think about all that you've journeyed through, everything you've experienced, the lives you've touched, I know one of your favorite songs is Mariah Carey's song, Hero. And I'm curious, how did that song and its lyrics become a favorite of yours?
Well, I'm really a jazz and classical music buff, but I heard that song a long, long time ago. And the lyrics are about owning oneself, and that within you lies a hero. Within you lies the answer. And when all is said and done, you have the strength to carry on. And I was fascinated First of all, the melody was beautiful, and it wasn't overproduced because I don't like overproduced music. It was just her singing a soul. And so I looked up who wrote that song. She wrote that song. And being a biracial person, she put a lot into that herself. And I encourage anyone, when you're feeling really down and alone, to just put that up on YouTube or wherever you get your music. And the lyrics are very profound because it's about, in the moments of darkness, you are your hero and it is within you. It's your journey. Embrace it. Own it. Take charge of it. Don't let anyone take it away from you.
And I think I'd like to close our interview by giving you a chance to read some of Mariah's lyrics to that song.
There's a hero. If you look inside your heart, you don't have to be afraid of what you are. There's an answer if you reach into your soul, and the sorrow that you know will melt away. And then a hero comes along with the strength to carry on and cast your fears aside and know you can survive. So when you feel like hope is gone, look inside and be strong. And you'll finally see the truth that hero lies in you.
Alejandro Marcel, thank you so much for being my guest today on Profiles in LGBTQ plus Courage.
Thank you, my dear friend Rick. It's been an honor.
Thank you for listening to today's interview. Founded in 1973, PFLAG is the first and largest organization for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people and their parents, families, friends, and allies. We have over 400 chapters and more than 200,000 members and supporters nationwide. Our members come from every generation and live in cities, small towns, and rural areas across the United States. PFLAG is committed to creating a world where diversity is celebrated and all people are respected, valued, and affirmed. For more information about PFLAG, explore the rest of this website or visit PFLAG National at pflag.org.